Right, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm hearing speakers, so I'm hoping you can hear me okay all the way around the room. Yeah, okay, at the back, that's absolutely fine. Okay, well, welcome to this Fareham Borough Council Community Action Team meeting. It's specifically on one subject, which is where we are, which is Solent Airport at Daedalus. Going to be looking a little bit into the history of Daedalus, the present, and then looking towards the future. I've tried to pitch things to pick up a number of points which have been made by people over the last period. There'll be a particular focus on issues like air-ground lighting, because I know that's something we've done a consultation on recently. But I do have just a few announcements, kind of safety type announcements I need to make first, and they've given me a script, so I'm afraid I am going to have to read this. I've done good evening. So, I've got a panel of officers here, because I do not have all the answers by any means, so I'll introduce who we actually have here. We have Martin Francis at the end, and Martin is the airport manager here at Solent Airport. And we have Sarah Ward next to him, who is our head of strategic sites. What that means is she's actually got 2 sites in her portfolio, this one and Wellbourne. And then we have Marshall Barrand, who is the projects director at Regional City Airports, so colleague of Martin, the airport manager. And then we have Andy Wanell, and Andy is the deputy chief executive officer at Fareham, but more importantly, he's the council's finance officer, so he looks after the money. In terms of, and we have Richard Jolly as well, should have mentioned, who is the Director of Planning and Regeneration for Fareham. So when there are things I don't know, and I'm sure there may be many, but if there are, I've got somebody I can ask, so I know someone to ask, so they're here. So just before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. There are 2 fire exits, out that way, down the stairs, out through the main door, into the car park. The second is actually out on the balcony, and there's a walkway through a grey metal door, which then takes you back down the stairs. So if we do need to run for it, just follow me, I'll be gone. We ask that you make sure your mobile phones are silenced so we don't get any interruptions. Questions are very welcome, but please wait to the end of the presentation to ask them, and then there'll be somebody with a microphone. Please do wait for the microphone, because there is a hearing loop in this room, because some people will be hard of hearing and they will want to hear you as well. So please do use the microphone. Please only ask one question at a time, because that will make sure that many more people have the opportunity to speak. I think we've got about 140 people in this room, so I think a quick calculation tells me that if everybody wanted to ask a question, it would be about 30 seconds for question and answer. So please bear that in mind when you do ask a question. We do have a number of councillors here. We've got councillors from Fareham Borough Council and also Gosport Borough Council. You are very welcome, but I do remind you the meeting is for our residents to be able to ask questions. And please make sure that questions remain on topic and do respect other people's perspectives on things. And if you feel uncomfortable about asking a question or we run out of time, there is a feedback box at the back if you want to leave any questions behind, or obviously have a chat to us afterwards. The meeting is being filmed, so it will be available on the council's YouTube channel to make sure as many people can keep up to date with Daedalus as possible. There's only the one camera, and there it is. And I think that's probably it. So that's the end of the script. So we can move now to the presentation. Thank you. So, to make sure this technology works. Clearly, it does. Oh, there we go, it does. Okay, that's me. I should have said that at the beginning. I'm Sean Woodward, leader of the Borough Council. So what I'm looking to cover this evening, and hopefully you can all see, get a good view of the screen. We're going to be looking at the history of Daedalus, and it is a fantastic history. We're going to look at the council's vision for Daedalus, on which we've consulted on a number of occasions already. How we finance Daedalus, because I know that's always of interest to people. What the achievements have been so far. Looking forward over the next 5 years, and what we're hoping to be able to achieve, that will include a section on air-ground lighting, and then looking at certain questions which have been raised during the recent consultation which has happened. So looking at the history first, and I said, fantastic history to the site. Many of you will remember our Daedalus 100 event, which was held in 2017, and that was to mark the centenary of flying from this airfield. And that means airfield flying started back in 1917, which is actually a year before the formation of the Royal Air Force. So, let's say a fantastic history. And that began with the Royal Naval Air Service, who opened the first seaplane training school here in 1917. In 2019, the country celebrated 75 years since D-Day, and obviously then HMS Daedalus, as it was, had an incredibly important role to play and was the busiest airfield in the country on D-Day. 52 years later, it was decommissioned, and then in the 27th of March 2015, Fareham Borough Council purchased Daedalus from the government. How much? I read somewhere the other day we paid £100 million for this site. Does anybody know how much it actually was?
You paid £1.
We paid £1. So the site cost Fareham Borough Council £1. Unfortunately, it also came with a very significant dowry as well from the government, which was to assist us in some of the work that would need doing on the site. So that's a quick canter through our history, right through nearer to the present day, but I couldn't resist just a few pictures that we managed to find of those very, very early days here, which I know nobody here will remember. So, and some will recognise some of these aircraft. There's a nice aerial view over Daedalus. Of course, it was all the airfield. It was all about the airfield, accommodation blocks, and naval personnel. So when we got to 1996, we had a time of very significant uncertainty. The site had closed, the site fell into disrepair. There was very little here that worked after. I think the MOD don't tend to leave sites in as good a condition as perhaps they look after them when they're actually functional. So it did fall into disrepair. There were various proposals put forward. One of them I recall was an immigration centre. We can remember the protests that a number of us marched on to prevent that happening, and there have been various other proposals. Quarrying for gravel is one that stayed around for a very long time under the airfield. There are very rich seams of minerals which they were featured for a while in the county minerals plan, ready ripe for extraction. So that was one very firm, very serious proposal, was a quarry, then a landfill site, and then literally thousands of houses. And that's the way airports tend to go, old airfields tend to go. There are a lot of them around the country. Many of them have been built on. So we didn't want that future for Daedalus, but there was a lot of uncertainty around because there was a time where the site was run by Hampshire Constabulary, a time where it was run by the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. There was a time where flying was going to be ceased entirely, and a lot of good people stood up and said, we don't want that to happen either. We value the aviation that takes place on site. So a new direction. In 2009, 2006 even, let's get this right, the site was acquired by the Homes and Communities Agency and the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. It had belonged to a regional quango, for want of a better word, called the South East England Development Agency, or CEDA. And they had a habit of buying up market failures, and they had quite a bizarre portfolio of greyhound racing tracks and little business centres, and they got this place, and there were various other things they owned as well, but they were utter failures as an organisation and as in terms of some of those sites that they acquired. So anyway, the government took it over, and then in 2013 planning permission was given for employment on the site, most particularly the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership. We've designated the site as the Solent Enterprise Zone, and that gave certain advantages to businesses that chose to move here, in that for those first years, anything up to 5 years, they were actually able to be free of that curse of business rates. So that was worth up to about £250,000 per business, potentially, from businesses that moved here. But that was history, that's a long time ago. That deal ran out several years ago. And then in 2015, I said the Borough Council purchased the site for that grand sum of £1. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about our vision for Daedalus, before moving on to what we've done and what we would like to do in the future. So, the Daedalus vision was first published in 2015 and updated a few years later. There was quite a bit of consultation went on at the time, and what came out of that vision was that we wanted the site in its entirety to be used in the main for aerospace, aviation, marine, advanced engineering. Those jobs tend to be highly skilled, well paid, and providing employment for local people. Always conscious of the fact that our friends in Gosport have the lowest job density of any town in England. What does that mean? It means that only about half of the population of Gosport, the adult working age population, they are not unemployed, but they don't work in Gosport, because there aren't the jobs in Gosport to support the population. So we felt that we could do something very positive about that here on this site. And we also felt that there needed to be a vibrant and importantly sustainable airfield here as well. So the zones in Daedalus, there are 3 critical zones of activity, and each of them add to the overall offer of the site, and together they help us to achieve that vision. And one of the guiding principles of Daedalus, the finance strategy, is that we recognise these 3 distinct areas of the site, but we do take them together in financial terms, in terms of what money, what they cost and what they generate. So it's the business parks, which there are 2, Swordfish over that way, which is where the Bellman hangars are, Bellman 1 with Britten Norman, one of this country's only surviving aircraft manufacturers, and then Bellman 2 and Bellman 3, blown up by Stuka bombers in the Second World War, and then Bellman 4 next to it. So that's Swordfish. Very little, we've done very little with Swordfish, and then over this side, Faraday Business Park, and of course the airport in the middle of it, and most importantly, really importantly, to the north, community facilities and the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Park, which we hope we will see open before very long, and certainly this year. Bit of honesty, airports are complex and challenging businesses to run. About 2/3 of all airports worldwide lose money. Small airports don't make money. For example, Blackpool made a loss of £650,000 last year. It's what goes on around the airfield that generates the income. Many businesses relying upon the presence of the airfield, but it's what goes on around it that is important. Many smaller airports are run by the public sector, who are willing to do it because airports are essential pieces of infrastructure which can really stimulate economic development, and that's Fareham Borough Council's motivation for owning and running an airport. We know that airports can stimulate economic growth. They make their money through what they can earn from passengers who fly from them using their facilities, such as retail and restaurants. And of course, Solent Airport doesn't have that many passengers, and it certainly doesn't have, the sort of commercial activity within the airport itself that somewhere like Heathrow or Gatwick has. But there are other commercial activities on the whole site which do provide that income, and the businesses which need airside access can come to the site and they can grow at the site. The original HMS Daedalus It's a much larger operation, solely comprising hangars, aircraft, runways, 3 of them, accommodation and offices. The MOD, of course, had no reason to try and turn a profit. And today, airfield operations have contracted down to a single runway, releasing masses of space to businesses to provide sustainable airport operations and generate a surplus to be able to help run council services. Not only have we seen jobs on site, but they're supported by a huge and growing supply chain off-site. So it isn't just what happens here, it's the jobs which are indirectly created off the site as well. So we're going to come on to a bit of money now, investing in Daedalus, which is what we've done. And our aim, a principle we have, is that the user pays. And most income from fees and charges, such as commercial rents on hangars and other buildings, or fuel purchases, income from the business parks. In fact, we built 4 buildings just over there, 14, 15, 16 and 17 Spitfire Way, and they were built specifically to generate income for the council to run the airport. And we were very clear that that's what we wanted to do with those buildings. Green space maintenance, that's important as well. That's covered for the community area to the north by planning Section 106 payments from National Grid. All of the elements together work to help make the site economically successful. So it has shown a surplus over the last couple of years, something like about £500,000 additional income, which can go back into the council's general fund and help fund essential council services. Because our council tax, Fairham's bit of it, and it is a very, very small bit of it, for the average home in the borough, the council tax that you pay to us is just £3 per week. That's it. I challenge you to even get your bins emptied, probably for £3 a week. Now, of course, there's a lot more in that bill that thumps through our letterboxes in March, mainly for Hampshire County Council, the police and the fire authority as well. But Fairham's bit of it for the average home in Fareham is £3 a week. So to be able to get about £500,000 out of Solent Airport in a couple of years is really helpful for the council's general fund. So it's important that we can run this site at no cost to council tax. So we don't take money from that £3 a week that we raise and come and run Daedalus with it, and that is important. So what have we invested so far into the site? It's £28 million. Where has it come from? People often like to ask that. Grants. I told you we got effectively a dowry from government back at the beginning, which was to assist with some loans that had been borrowed against the site. We've also had, with this very building, we were lucky enough to receive some money from the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership towards putting this building up. This building, people often want to talk about jobs at Daedalus. 275 souls work in this building, 47 companies. Some amazing examples of success among them. One company I can think of started in this building with 2 employees. It now has 45 employees in this building. It's those sorts of successes which, if we hadn't done it, they wouldn't be here. And they need the airport. As part of whom I'm talking about, Flylogics. So to be specific, a company that manufactures large drone-type aircraft which will go out and help with oil spills and things like that, which they can monitor. So just one example in this very building that we're in. Borrowing, we borrowed what's called prudential borrowing, £17.8 million. Some of that will be external, some of it will be what we call internal borrowing, money which we have within the council's reserves already, but we still have to pay an interest rate on it, whether it comes from externally or internally, but none of it from the money raised from council tax. In fact, it might interest you to know, some of you would have heard me say this before, council tax only raises, I think it's about 15% of the total cost of running the council services. The other, around 85%, comes from other activities, such as what we do here. And of course we've had capital receipts in, we've got land which has got Fareham College there on it, the Civil Engineering Training Centre, that was Borough Council land. The buildings which I mentioned, the 4 new buildings over there, one of those has been sold, a couple of them have been rented, the final one is probably about to be either rented or sold. So 7.6 million of receipts coming in, and of course as any good accountant will tell you, costs of things are all about balancing income and expenditure. You can't just talk about the expenditure without also having regard for the income, because quite rightly people want to know what's the net cost of all of this, not what did it cost or what did it bring in. Just an example of what it brings in, airside activity brings into the council about £1 million a year. Non-airside activity brings into the council about £2 million a year. So the entire operation, and we run it as a single operation, brings in about £3 million a year to Fareham Borough Council. And if I say that every £50,000 is the equivalent of 1% on the council tax, it just puts it in perspective with what the council spends and what the council brings in a year. It is a pretty sizable business. So third-party development, such as the interconnector, which is very visible just over there, contributed to community space at the site. They also, of course, have a lease, and that lease has to be paid for and will be paid for. So this brings in capital receipts as well. And when people pay service charges, if they're airside, they pay more than if they're non-airside, but they all have to pay service charges to cover the council's costs in running the site. So income can be generated from the sale of assets, that can be invested back into the site, and that's really important as well, so we don't need to go out borrowing more and more and more, because we can bank income and not just spend it out as revenue. We can bank it and we can use it for other capital projects here. And in the next section, you'll be able to see what has been achieved with those investments so far. And I mentioned those buildings over there, which were purely put up to help with the costs of running the site. This was when we opened the runway. The very first thing the Borough Council did was to resurface the runway, because back in 2014, when we started talking about potentially taking the site on, the runway was about to close. It was in such a state that if we hadn't stepped in, that was literally the end before it even got to its 100 years of flying at Daedalus. So since 2015, what's been going on? Well, the building we're in, I've mentioned already, Fareham Innovation Centre, and the 4 dozen companies and the few hundred people working from it, was awarded the most innovative, small business-friendly programme, campaign or project. It's been extended to twice its original size. Why is that? Well, we built the first phase and it filled up within months. So we had to get on and build another phase as well, because and now we're at over 90% occupancy of the entire innovation centre, which is a mix of workshops and office space throughout the building. And if you don't know whether any of you came in the main entrance, but if you did, there's a big board there with every business that's here, and that board is nearly full now because the centre is nearly full. Fareham College's CMAS, it's an award-winning educational facility, deemed as outstanding by Ofsted. That started with 900 students, there are now 1,400 students there, and they are providing the apprentices that the businesses here need. It's a massive ecosystem of talent homegrown on this site. There's great links between Fareham College and BAE, GE Aviation, South West Railway, Portsmouth University. And then CTEC was developed, that's the Civil Engineering Training College next door, and that was developed to address the shortage of civil engineers in the south of England. They have been awarded and recognised as the Apprentice Initiative of the Year and Construction Apprenticeship Provider of the Year. It's fully operational, it's realistic groundworks, we call it colloquially the bigger school, and the civil engineering training environment is in there. Employers visit the site regularly, they support training, they mentor the apprentices, and they maintain strong industry connections. None of that could have happened without this site. This is a picture of the building that we're in, the Innovation Centre. You can hardly see the join, but the first two blocks on your left, that was the beginning, and then a link, and then another big block on the right. Just a couple of comments from a couple of the businesses in here. Animation studios, maths shop, loving the, well, just leave you to have a little look at those. LR Animation Studios, they make videos using dynamic and engaging videos for businesses. Maths shop, specialise in mathematical modelling and engineering software, with expertise in instrument control, data extraction, visualisation, exactly the sort of businesses that we want to see developing here. So the employment hub, what does that provide? 88,000 square foot of new business units on the site. It's the largest employment site in the area. It gives us much of the employment land that we need within the Fareham local plan, and of course it's backed up with the Solent Enterprise Zone status. The business park that we're in at the moment, that's an award-winning park. It benefits from the rest of the site, direct access to an airport, direct access to apprentices in the college, new ideas coming from education centres and other innovation centres around the country. There's a mix of hangarage here for general aviation and commercial aviation businesses, and some larger strategic businesses. 4 new units, I've mentioned what's happened with those. We've attracted some big companies like PropTech here, UTP is here, All 4 Logistics, Britain Norman, HC Coils, they employ quite a number of staff. It also includes IFA2, which isn't just, it brings in electricity from France, although I understand we've been selling a fair bit the other way recently. You can monitor it by the minute on the internet if you want to, and see where all those gigabytes are going or coming from. So that's been a very useful development to us. Powers, when it's giving full power in this country, powers about 1 million homes. So it's a not insignificant piece of kit. They've also funded the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Park. What we're waiting for at the moment is the grass to grow, quite literally. So when the grass is deemed fit, we can open it up to everybody. That's all that's left. Everything else is sorted out. Last year, for example, Faraday Business Park, which we're sitting in at the moment, significant income. It's £500,000 income to the council just from this one business park. And there's a little picture of some of the buildings which have gone up here on the business park, and the interconnector there in the background. So what about the airport itself? Because I've really talked about everything except flying, I think. It's been everything that's going on around the airport in that sort of ecosystem. Well, the airport is managed by regional and city airports on behalf of Fareham Borough Council. We've got some good officers, but we haven't got officers that know how to run airports, so it's very appropriate that we buy that expertise in. We did, as I said right at the beginning, the runway improvements. We've obtained a CAA licence and border force approval, so that means that planes here can fly to the Isle of Man, the Channel Islands, and anywhere within the European Union. The control tower was refurbished. It's a Second World War building. 11 commercial aviation hangars have been built. Contrary to some views, they are all let. Every single one of them is let and generating an income. The big user of hangarage is Britain Norman, our only sovereign aircraft manufacturer. The historic Bellman hangars I mentioned a little bit earlier. NATS training facility radar, you can probably see that big red dish, and that's, those of you that might have flown out of Heathrow will maybe recognise it. It used to sit at West Drayton, which was the air traffic control centre, but before air traffic control moved to Fareham into Swanwick, then that was where it was run from. That dish has kind of done the rounds over the years, but NATS, National Air Traffic Services, approached Fareham Borough Council and said, we've got a couple of dozen radar facilities around the country. Whenever we want to train our radar operators, we have to take one offline, which obviously isn't ideal. So they said, could they have some land here build their radar facility, which they do. That produces service charges to us at quite as well. I said it might be rather nice if we could have a dish on the top. It wasn't actually necessary for the function that they're doing, but it looks good. So, and it does actually spin sometimes as well. So it's a good feature here. The fuel farm, you can see that over there as well, the big bowsers and tanks which hold our fuel. And I will talk a little bit about fuel later as well, because I know there are some concerns about lead in aircraft fuel. So it's a very popular fuel farm. Some people treat it as a petrol station. Yeah, literally come in, fill up, go away. We have the Royal Flight in. Sometimes we have Sky News helicopter I've seen in, and various others that would just come to fill with fuel. So income is coming in from airside through fuel sales, landing fees, hangarage rental, and handling fees for those aircraft. And it's also become a very active site with an impressive history, and the public really does engage with it, as we find, if you ever take a trip down to the control tower and cafe at 05, most days there'll be an enthusiastic group of people there enjoying the facilities and enjoying what's going on at the airport. So we've got a really good community here as well. It's not just about the business side, it's about the community as well. And there's a picture of some of the general aviation hangars. So, talking specifically about the community then, Cafe at 05 I've mentioned, a very popular viewing area. The big public events we've held here, Daedalus D-Day 75, 75th anniversary of D-Day. Then we tried our hand at an air show for Daedalus 100 and to commemorate that event. We've got the aviation themed play area. In fact, we've got one at the cafe. We've also got one by what will be the Platinum Jubilee Park as well. And of course the Gate Guardian, another little gift from National Grid, which adorns the corner of the site at Peel Common. And in fact this building has the original model, which the Mr. Clutterbuck, who created Daedalus for us, that model is there, which we used as well. It's a picture of one of our events here, and Dakota in the background. And of course the iconic Spitfire, I've already mentioned the word once, but they're an important attraction here as well. And of course they do help with fuel sales, and they're here for this month. Right, that one went slightly too far, I think. So these pictures really illustrate how far we've come over the last few years. Rule out the fact that it looks like a very yellow meadow. I'm sure that'll change during this week, but you can see, that's just a piece of Faraday Business Park there, and how it has changed just over the last 7 years. That's the Maritime Coast Guard Agency's MEOLUT system, and that any sailors amongst you who might use the EPIRB system, the transponder systems, if you fall out of the boat and you have one of those, they used to be traceable to within probably a few hundred yards, which doesn't sound as if that's too difficult, but of course if that's in the ocean of many miles and trying to find somebody, this will pin you down to within a few feet. So it's a very good system that the Maritime Coast Guard Agency have on site. So, last section, looking to the future now. And how do we see that? Well, we're looking at an investment plan for the airport side. We're looking at now for £4.7 million, and that's one of the key parts of that is an aeronautical ground lighting system. And we employed some experts to do some work to review the council's activities at Solent Airport, and especially how the aviation market has changed since the pandemic, which of course it has, and we need to be cognizant of that. And they advised the council on the investment required for the airport to maintain and extend its service offer. And they suggested that Solent Airport should focus on improving its general aviation offering, And these investments will allow the airport to remain operational and grow a competitive position in the market. It has the potential to increase revenues by drawing new customers to the site as well as maintaining and growing existing businesses. And that's what's really important here. And some people said to me, well, why do aeronautical ground lighting? Is that going to bring a load of new business to the site? Well, potentially, but it's also going to keep some of the important businesses which are already here, which have to go to do the instrument ratings which some pilots need. At the moment, they have to go to places like Belgium to do that training, which isn't the best, so they can actually do it, or would be able to do it if we had air ground lighting and a navigation system here on site. There are a number of aircraft that can't visit Daedalus, they can't come in for maintenance because we don't have lighting and we don't have an instrument navigation system. So there are businesses here that if we don't do it, they'll be thinking twice. They are thinking twice about whether they want to remain with their important jobs based here. And there are businesses that want to come here and maintain aircraft and build aircraft and do other things, who again wouldn't come here unless that system was likely to be in place. So it's important not just for potential new business, but also for existing business. So specifically looking at that lighting, so what is it? Well, it's a series, that picture actually is at Biggin Hill, and you can probably make out that the lights are on. And the lights are on at many airports in daylight as well, because they do very significantly improve the visibility for the pilot, and they do help with lining up, etc. So you'll often see lights on at airports in the daytime, and particularly if it's a bit misty or the visibility is slightly suspect. So what it is a series of lights at ground level along the runway with some masts marking the approach to the runway to enable pilots to see where they need to land in the dark or in poor visibility. So what this would enable primarily, it would enable people to utilise the airport throughout its operating hours in the winter months. And the operating hours are 9 a.m. to 6 p.m, which of course at this time of year is fine. You know, it's gone 6 o'clock, it's still light, you could still land. But late in a couple of months' time, about 4:30, it'll be too dark for people to use the airport in its operating hours. So that would mean that people can plan flights to Solent Airport with the reassurance that even if they're a bit delayed, they'd still be able to land. So this sits in line with the Council's vision to realise the potential for developing and increasing corporate aviation activity while continuing to support and grow general aviation uses at the site, to ensure the airfield's financially sustainable in the medium to long term, and we have to look beyond the now with this, to further improve the infrastructure and facilities by enhancing its quality, making it more attractive to visitors and to new and to existing businesses, and of course to maintain a safe, secure, efficiently managed and sustainable airfield. So those are really what it's about. That's how it would be. So looking at lights either set into the ground or slightly proud of the ground down the runways. Feedback on the consultation, I think we sent out something like 1,600 letters. We got back nearly 200 responses. And the response was mixed. And a number of issues and questions were raised. Many, I must say, did extend beyond the issue of air-ground lighting. So they weren't all about lights, they were also about the future of the airport and how operations may change in that future. So there is a business case. People have asked me, well, what's the payback period? Well, the payback period obviously depends. And it depends how successful the airport is, but it's estimated to be at least 6 years. So the runway would be available for 100% of the operational hours, that's 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. More flexibility if people are delayed after dark, It's absolutely necessary if scheduled flights are ever to operate from Solent. It's offered by most UK airports that have hard runways. And if flights were to occur outside the current operating hours, which at the moment is 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 9 a.m. to sunset, if that comes earlier. So what they would be able to do is operate outside those hours, but they would be subject to a 10 movement limit per day between sunset and midnight. So that would mean absolutely nothing at all between midnight and sunrise and 9 a.m. but that there would be that flexibility for up to 10 flights after dark and before midnight. But the majority of what happened, I'm advised, would be allowing the airfield to run through its full operational hours up until 6 p.m. So there is a business case which the council had, which looked at various scenarios impacting on income, landing fees, aircraft parking, fuel sales, corporate handling. I've mentioned the payback period, and of course it does enable the airport at a low level to attract passenger services, and of course it depends as well on the health of the aviation market. So it doesn't mean that big jets or anything like that will be coming in with lots of passengers. The biggest aircraft that can function on this runway, probably a maximum of 19 seats. So that's the biggest. And the ones which are most likely going to be used will probably be about 9 seats. And that's things like the Britain-Norman Islander. So you will see the runway available, as I said, 100% of operational hours, more flexibility, and I've mentioned what would happen after normal closing hours. In terms of the airport's operating hours, there is no change, no current plans to change those operating hours at all. We already do host occasional flights outside the operating hours. For instance, during the summer, we have had flights that we have allowed to come in after 6 o'clock, but before dark, and there certainly have been some like that in the light evenings, and they do receive permission to be able to do that. The planning restriction is what restricts the movements between sunset and midnight to 10 o'clock, and the actual hours of operation, of course, depend very much on demand and the resources of the airport. So what happens next in terms of AGL? Well, the planning application will be going in this month or early next month. Amendments are being made if required at the moment, and they're taking account of consultation feedback. We would expect the planning decision in December, and then if that decision is positive, then between February and August the install would happen and it would become fully operational in August of next year. So that would be the next steps. I'm going to go on now, this is sort of a final section, which is going on looking at environmental considerations at the airport as well. So noise, pollution, etc. If the noise at the airport should exceed 69, I think it is, decibels, then the council would have to look at issues for residents particularly. In fact, it would probably have to help them move. Well, clearly we're not going to allow a situation like that to develop. Some consultation responses raise concerns about increased noise if planes take off and land at night. Well, along with the planning application, the applicants will need to submit an official noise report which will look at the potential impacts of the installation of air-ground lighting on noise at night. The studies that they're doing, they use as a 92-day summer period from June through to September as the standard period to measure noise, because that generally represents the worst case scenario, because aircraft traffic in the UK is generally higher in the summer months. Solent Airport, I might add, though, is well below the levels that would require any sort of council action, and the level we have is 51 decibels. And you can see the tracks there. Circuits, flying circuits is another one. It's not flying circus, that's flying circuits. And it is important that we do have a look at that, and I am engaged with a number of residents who have concerns about this. I've tried to do a bit of due diligence on this to work out exactly what was revised when it was changed. The circuit was revised twice, revised since 2016, and that was in 2019 and 2022. There's a northern area there which we deem a noise sensitive area, and that was introduced in September 2019, so 3 years ago. And there have been alleged breaches of regulations investigated in 2021. They were sent to the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, for investigation, and they were dismissed by the CAA in 2021. There's been a new circuit which has been trialled since April of this year, and we're looking to see that fully implemented next month. A little look at climate change, which I think is an important topic as well. And the Council is working towards carbon neutrality by 2030. And Regional City Airports is currently undertaking an audit, so we know what the airport's current carbon footprint is. And we've done it across all other council operations, and we think it's important to do it with Solent Airport as well. They're looking at reduced energy use on site with low emission vehicles on the airport, converting airport facilities to low carbon operation, cycle to work, green transport, recycling targets. And then we have avgas, and what's currently at the site is, and this is the most commonly used, is low lead, and that's 100 octane low lead fuel, which we supply here in large quantities. That has a small but significant lead content within it, which we do need to be aware of. I think it's something like half a gram or something per litre, but it's there. It's half the normal lead of sort of full fat avgas, but it does contain lead all the same. So there's a couple of grams in a gallon of avgas. But we are exploring unleaded fuel, and that's UL91, unleaded 91 octane. And that is suitable for most aircraft without modification. And perhaps of interest, it's one of the aircraft it is suitable for is the PA-28 aircraft, which are used by the flying schools. So that could become unleaded. So over half of aircraft can take it without modification, but there is very little of it in the country. And our supplier, though, Air Total, is able to source it. And I'll say to you this evening that I'm very, very keen to get unleaded avgas here on site for purchase. And I think that is a big commitment for us, but I think it's something we absolutely need to do. So people will be able to fly all aircraft, whether they're taking Jet A1, which has no lead, but then also the great majority of the flights that are happening here can also run on unleaded fuel. As I said, unleaded means, low lead is 0.56 grams per litre, which is about 0.1% of the fuel, but of the actual quantity of fuel. But of course, unleaded is unleaded. And it is at some local airports as well, some very small ones. So, other environmental issues, really sort of carrying on with that one. So there are limits on lead concentrations, but we are very, very, very low on that scale, very, very much below any sort of maximum limit.
Councillor Woodward, I think you need to click on,
Is there something else to pop in?
I'm not sure where it's done that.
Oh, that's funny, they put them in like that. Okay. Yeah, so looking at other things like nitrogen dioxide, it's important, we're well within any permitted levels. We also have to assess the impact of planning applications on on bird mitigation as well, even though we have done studies and struggled, to be honest, because obviously birds in aircraft aren't the cosiest of bedfellows and they don't tend to mix happily, and we found very, very few indeed, negligible numbers in fact. But Daedalus site was initially designated as a secondary support area for solet waders and brent geese. Now that we have evidence of no birds, much of the areas within Faraday and Swordfish business parks have now been removed from that designation, which enables the development plans to move forward. So that brings me to the end, I'm really pleased to hear, of the presentation. So we can now move on to questions. So we'll just get a bit of light on the scene.